Hey guys, my name's Alyssa, and this is Murder She Crocheted, the podcast where we unravel dark truths, sometimes one thread at a time. Alright, y'all, so I just finished filming the Walter Collins case, and I realized it's a lot shorter than I thought it was going to be. So I am going to release an extra episode this week to kind of make up for that time difference. This is also a shorter case, so it should equal out just fine. Today, we're going to talk about Traci Leigh Jones, a woman whose name didn't make national headlines, but it should have. Traci was vulnerable, yes, but she was also trying. She was fighting her way back to stability, to motherhood, to herself, and in the end, she was betrayed in the cruelest, most calculated way. So, before we get into the case, let's talk about our crochet project this week. I did not plan on making a second episode, so I did not plan a crochet project. However, I have one of my own patterns. It's not really my own. My grandma taught me how to do it. So we're going to do that one, and I will make sure that it is typed in a document and linked in the show notes for you. But we're going to make a towel holder for your kitchen. It hangs over your oven handle, and you loop your towel through it so it doesn't fall out into the ground. So you'll need, I'm using worsted weight yarn. It's probably better if you use cotton if you plan on using it a lot. Cotton kind of hangs in better than worsted weight, but I personally just have a lot of worsted weight yarn. So you'll need your yarn. I use a 5.75 millimeter crochet hook or a 5.5 usually. And then you'll need 2 loops. I'm using metal ones. You can use wooden ones. I've used the plastic circular clips that hold the shower curtain onto the shower rod. Whatever tickles your fancy. You can even use hair ties. Just something that the towel can slide through. So, with the yarn in hand, let's begin. On June 22nd, 2020, a fisherman on Kentucky Lake made a grim discovery. A large black storage tote floating near the shore. Inside, tightly zip-tied and weighed down with concrete blocks, was the body of 41-year-old Traci Leigh Jones. She had been strangled and hidden away by the man that she believed loved her, Jeffrey Kenneth Rogers. But as most cases show, the story is not that simple, because where there is manipulation, there is rarely one victim. Jeffrey's wife, Tammy Rogers, was also part of this twisted story. Not a killer, but not exactly innocent either. This case crosses state lines, exposes a hidden life of exploitation, and shines a light on psychological abuse that can happen behind closed doors, even in marriage, even in places that seem safe. We're going to talk about the lies, the power plays, the trauma, and eventually the cold-blooded murder of a woman who wanted nothing more than to feel loved and secure. So who was Traci Leigh Jones? Traci Leigh Jones was born on June 15th, 1979, in a small town called Dublin, Texas. She was someone people remembered. Friends described her as funny, creative, deeply empathetic. She was a daughter, a mother, and a survivor. Traci lived with mental illness, specifically dissociative identity disorder, a condition that has long been misunderstood. Those closest to her said that she had multiple alters, with one called Elizabeth, who acted as her protector. When Elizabeth came forward, she was assertive and sometimes confrontational, but Traci herself was just trying to get through the day. She also battled a long-term addiction to methamphetamine, which derailed many of her attempts for stability. But by early 2020, Traci again was trying. She recently returned to Dublin after completing another round of rehab, and she wanted to rebuild her life. She was also working with her attorney, Heath Allen, to regain custody of her daughter. This was a woman in recovery. She was rebuilding. This was a woman who believed that she had found people willing to help her. Instead, she fell into a trap set by two people who saw her vulnerability as a business opportunity and then later a threat. So who are those two people? To the outside world, Jeffrey Kenneth Rogers and Tammy Rogers were just another middle-aged couple living in suburban Texas. To the outside world, Jeffrey Kenneth Rogers and Tammy Rogers were just another middle-aged couple navigating life in suburban Texas. Jeffrey was born in 1960 and had a background in IT and logistics management. He presented himself as a professional, a man with money, resources, and direction. Tammy, for her part, was the principal of a local elementary school within the Arlington Independent School District. She was educated, respected, responsible for hundreds of children and staff. However, behind closed doors, their life was something else entirely. Together, they ran a homemade pornography enterprise called Circle V Entertainment. The setup was amateur and the content was often exploitative. And the business model was dependent on recruiting women who were desperate financially, emotionally, or otherwise. Now, I want to make sure that you hear me when I say there is nothing wrong with sex work and there is nothing wrong with adult entertainment. And that is not something that you have to be ashamed of. The negativity in this situation comes in from the manipulation and the exploitation of these two people. According to Tammy's later statements to law enforcement, the entire pornography operation had been Jeffrey's idea, born out of not really desire, but cruelty. Tammy said that Jeffrey had told her that she was too fat to be intimate with, and that if she wanted to fix their marriage, she'd have to let him film her having sex with other men. Now that suggestion turned into a coercive cycle. Jeffrey convinced Tammy that it was not only acceptable, but it was her idea. Over time, he manipulated her into believing that the porn business was empowering, even essential to their marriage. Now, again, I'm not saying that adult entertainment is not empowering, but in this situation, he's a dick. The manipulation was so complete that by the time the police came calling, Tammy still sounded like a woman trying to explain why she let it happen. But there was a third person involved with Circle V Entertainment, Senta Grant, one of Jeffrey's extramarital affairs. Senta didn't just participate in the pornography, she also became a recruiter, and she helped Jeffrey and Tammy find vulnerable women, and in late 2019, she introduced them to Traci Leigh Jones. So how did Traci get pulled in? Senta first made contact with Traci through Craigslist in 2019. Traci was still in recovery and trying to put her life back together and struggling financially. She needed a place to stay and she needed income. Senta, acting on behalf of Jeffrey and Tammy, offered her both. The proposal was simple on paper. Traci could live in an RV owned by the Rogers in Fort Worth and earn $300 per week in exchange for appearing in homemade porn videos. Traci accepted. Now what comes next was a blur of blurred boundaries. Somewhere between the cameras, the coercion, and the quiet manipulation, Traci developed feelings for Jeffrey. deep feelings. According to Tammy's later court testimony, Jeffrey did nothing to discourage Traci's affection. In fact, he cultivated it, which of course he did. Because, of course he did. He fed the fantasy that he would leave Tammy and start a new life with Traci. He allowed, even encouraged, her to believe that their relationship was more than transactional. On Christmas Day of 2019, Traci told Tammy that she and Jeffrey were in love and she wanted to go public with their relationship. Tammy, who was humiliated, tried to maintain some control over the situation. She didn't push back too hard. She let it ride, perhaps trying to give some peace, right? Keep some peace. She even gave Traci a promise ring on Jeffrey's behalf, a symbolic gesture meant to keep Traci emotionally invested, or more cynically, compliant. Behind the scenes, Tammy would later admit she knew it was getting out of hand. If the relationship drama and promise rings and feelings and lies were not enough, by early 2020, the dynamic between Traci and the writers had begun to sour. What had started as an exploitative arrangement had turned into an escalating nightmare. Traci was increasingly unstable and enraged by broken promises, and she began harassing the couple. She contacted Arlington ISD, alerting them to Tammy's involvement in Circle V Entertainment. She contacted NBC Dallas-Fort Worth, trying to bring media attention to the porn operation, and the consequences were swift. Tammy was forced to resign from her job as the principal, but that wasn't enough for Traci. She then reportedly began extorting the couple for continued payments, threatening to leak more details unless she received $300 a week, the same amount that she had been paid while filming. Friends like Tiffany Williams and David Walker later testified that Traci bragged about blackmailing the Rogers and saw it as justified retribution for how she had been used. Tammy, meanwhile, began referring to Traci as the devil. The pressure mounted. Even after losing her job, Tammy was still receiving texts from Traci. Often. One simply read, "It's not over." The Rogers began moving their RV from city to city, Fort Worth, Burleson, Granbury, but Traci kept finding them. She wasn't letting go, and Jeffrey wasn't doing anything to de-escalate the situation. On June 15th, 2020, Tammy learned that the Fort Worth Police Department had declined to pursue harassment charges against Traci. She told Jeffrey she was done. She wanted out of the porn business, out of the web they had spun, out of Traci's orbit. Jeffrey promised her that he would end it. He said he would draft a contract, offer Traci money, and finally make it stop. Tammy didn't believe him, though. It hadn't worked before, she told investigators, so why would it work this time? On June 16th, 2020, Jeffrey left the RV at around 2 p.m. and drove to Dublin. He picked Traci up, and they went to the Holiday Inn Express in Stephenville. The two checked into room 123, and that's where things get a little crazy. Tammy texted Jeffrey throughout the evening, but got no response. He returned the next morning, June 17th, at about 6:45 a.m. Tammy would later describe him as disheveled and still wearing the same clothes. He didn't shower, and he didn't explain much. Jeffrey told her that he had driven Traci around Dublin, they had talked, he had given her $300, and a signed agreement to drop the extortion. He claimed he did not sleep with her. He claimed that she was going to take her paperwork to the lawyer, but by that point, Traci was already dead. Jeffrey had strangled her in room 123. He then put her body in a 50-gallon black Craftsman storage tote, drilled holes into the lid, and zip-tied it shut. He also had placed 2 concrete blocks inside to weigh it down, and then loaded it in the back of his 2017 Dodge Ram. Later that same day, Jeffrey and Tammy left on a road trip to Kentucky. The reason? Tammy's father had open heart surgery, and she wanted to see him. Now, according to her statements, Jeffrey was quiet, distracted, detached on the way there. On June 18th, Jeffrey told Tammy he was going to go with his brother to haul something in the dump truck. In reality, he drove to Breakers Marina on the Tennessee side of the Kentucky Lake. Surveillance footage showed him arriving at 8:46 a.m., renting a pontoon boat for $250 cash, and loading in the tote, wrapped in a blanket. At 9:52, he left the dock and steered the boat into open water. Out on the lake, where no one could see him, he dumped Traci's body. Tammy would later tell Texas Rangers Don Stoner and Danny Briley that sometime after they returned from the trip, Jeffrey told her Traci was taken care of. That was all he said, but that was all Tammy needed to hear. She said, I knew she was gone. On the morning of June 22nd, 2020, a fisherman noticed something strange floating near the shoreline of the Kentucky Lake just off the Tennessee River. It just so happened to be a large black plastic storage tote, industrial-sized and clearly heavy. He pulled it in, expecting to find trash. Instead, he found horror. Inside the tote was the body of a woman. She had been zip-tied inside with 2 cinder blocks anchoring her down. Her hands and feet were bound, and the lid of the tote had been drilled with holes, likely to allow water in to help it sink, but it hadn't sunk completely. It floated just enough to be found. Law enforcement responded very quickly. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, or TBI, and the Kentucky State Police arrived on scene and sealed off the area. Once the crime scene was contained, they began the task of identifying the victim. Inside the tote, they found Traci's Texas driver's license along with some of her personal items. She was identified by fingerprints, and the autopsy conducted by Dr. Christopher Kiefer confirmed what police had already suspected. Traci had been strangled to death. There was no water in her lungs, which meant she had been dead before her body was submerged. This wasn't a drowning, this was murder. With the ID in hand, Kentucky authorities reached out to Texas. Specifically, they contacted Heath Allen, Traci's family attorney. Allen immediately informed them that Traci had been afraid for her life. Her last known communication to him was June 1st, and she warned him that she was terrified of Jeffrey and Tammy. The case, now officially a homicide, stretched across state lines. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigations and the Kentucky State Police handed the lead over to Texas Rangers Don Stoner and Danny Briley, who immediately began building a case. On June 23rd, 2020, less than 24 hours after the body was discovered, Jeffrey Rogers was arrested at the RV where he and Tammy were living in Fort Worth. According to law enforcement, the arrest was swift and quiet, but Jeffrey's reaction was telling. As he was being taken into custody, he reportedly told the Rangers, quote, "I'm in a world of shit. I'm not remorseful, but I'm not remorseful," end quote. He waived his Miranda rights and gave investigators consent to search his RV and his vehicle. What they found would tie him directly to the crime, because criminals aren't smart. Inside Jeffrey's Dodge Ram, investigators found bloodstains, 2 of which tested positive for human blood. They discovered a Kyocera flip phone, not his regular device, but a burner phone that he had and used to send text messages to Traci's phone after her death. He was attempting to create a false timeline and suggest that she was still alive. Digital devices recovered from the RV contained pornographic content associated with Circle V Entertainment, as well as signed contracts, including one signed by Traci. Police also recovered receipts from Home Depot that showed purchases of Craftsman storage totes, zip ties, and concrete blocks, all items used in the disposal of Tracy's body. Next, they reviewed surveillance footage from the Holiday Inn Express, which showed Jeffrey and Tracy entering the hotel and later only Jeffrey leaving. At Breakers Marina, footage captured him loading the tote, wrapped in a blanket, onto the rented pontoon boat and then later returning empty-handed. GPS data from his truck placed him on the exact route to Kentucky Lake during the precise window of time that the body would have been dumped. The trail, once invisible, was now impossible to ignore. As the evidence mounted, so did the pressure on Tammy Rogers. She was not charged with any crime, but she became a crucial witness. And her statements to the Texas Rangers painted a disturbing portrait of the psychological power that Jeffrey held over her. Tammy admitted that Jeffrey told her to ask for a lawyer if questioned. He told her he deleted messages from her phone, and he coached her on what to say and made her practice the answers. She told investigators that Jeffrey admitted to her privately that he had killed Tracy, but tried to justify it, saying that Tracy was a danger to them. According to Tammy, he described the murder as a necessary act. He never really expressed true remorse and only was frustrated that things had gone too far. Other witnesses added weight to the case. Tiffany Williams was a close friend to Tracy and told investigators that Tracy had openly admitted to blackmailing the Rogers. She was also the one that revealed Elizabeth, Tracy's protector persona, which often dominated interactions with the couple, especially during times of distress. David Walker, another friend, confirmed that Tracy had said she was collecting weekly payments from Jeffrey and Tammy to stay silent. The last people to see Tracy alive, Patricia Malloy and Blas Vargas, confirmed that she had left for Stephenville to meet with Jeffrey Rogers on the afternoon of June 16th. She never came back. Now, for weeks, Jeffrey had refused to confess. He reportedly offered to give a full statement only if the Tennessee charges against him were dropped. But on April 20th, 2021, he finally broke. In a detailed recorded confession to the Texas Rangers, Jeffrey admitted to everything. He told them that he had strangled Tracy in room 123 at the Holiday Inn. He told them that he placed her body in the storage tote, that he drove her across state lines, and that he rented the boat, took her out, and dumped her into the water. He even admitted to sending the fake text to Tracy's phone in order to create an alibi. He admitted to everything. However, what stood out most in his confession is not what he did, but how he explained it. He said, and I quote, "I was in a tube. I couldn't go back. The only way out was forward. I left a trail because deep down I wanted to get caught." End quote. He cried when he talked about Tracy's funeral, and he told the Rangers she didn't deserve what happened. But even in his sorrow, there was some sort of performative tone, a manipulation that really never quite stopped. Psychologists reviewing the case noticed that Jeffrey exhibited narcissistic and sociopathic traits. He had controlled Tammy for years, manipulating her emotionally and sexually. He had controlled Tracy, fostering emotional dependencies, while knowing full well he did not plan to stay with her or that he planned to kill her. And even in his confession, he framed himself as trapped rather than responsible. Following his confession, Jeffrey was formally indicted for murder. The case was prosecuted in Texas by District Attorney M. Allen Nash and Assistant District Attorney Jet A. Smith. And the case was presided over by Judge Jason C. Cashon. Y'all, I don't know. At this point, you should be used to me not pronouncing names right. Rogers' defense attorney, David H. Stokes, attempted to negotiate a lighter sentence, but with a full confession, overwhelming digital and physical evidence, and a grieving family behind the victim, there was no room for doubt. Initially, Rogers was held on a $500,000 bond, though this amount was later reduced during a preliminary hearing, sparking outrage in some circles. But justice was still on its way. On April 20th, 2021, Rogers entered his official confession into the legal record. And on November 7th, 2022, he pled guilty to the charge of murder. His sentence was decisive, 30 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice with no recommendation for parole. Rogers also waived his right to appeal and was credited 856 days for time served awaiting trial. As for Tammy, she was never charged. Her cooperation with law enforcement and the lack of physical involvement in the murder and being portrayed as a psychologically abused spouse all contributed to her walking free. Whether she is a victim, enabler, or both, that's something that the legal system and perhaps the public will continue to debate. Traci Leigh Jones was many things. She was flawed, yes. She battled with addiction. She struggled with mental illness. But she was also a mother and a daughter and a person. She was a woman who wanted love, a woman who wanted to be safe, and a woman who trusted the wrong person and was betrayed in the most devastating way possible. Jeffrey Rogers didn't just kill Traci. He exploited her. He lured her with false promises, used her for personal and financial gain, and then when she threatened to expose him, he silenced her permanently. He zip-tied her into a storage tote like an object, drove her across state lines, and dumped her in the water as if her life meant nothing. But Traci was not nothing, and her life did matter. This case didn't dominate headlines, and it wasn't splashed across primetime crime shows or discussed endlessly on news panels. But it should have been. It speaks to the dark corners where abuse hides, behind titles like husband, or principal, or professional. It hides behind the illusion of safety, behind the manipulations that make victims doubt their own instincts. Traci's story is a cautionary tale about control, about silence, and about the insidious way that abusers can isolate, gaslight, and dominate. If you or somebody that you know is in an abusive relationship, whether it's physical, emotional, or psychological, please reach out. There are people who will believe you, people who will help you. You are not alone in this. All right, guys. So thank you for hanging out with me again for just another mini episode. I was honored to be able to tell you Traci's story. Here is the finished product. I need to weave in my ends still. Y'all know I do that like very last. So it hangs over like this, and you just put your towel through here. It was real quick, y'all. As always, please follow us on social media. Like, share, subscribe. Anything that you guys make, or if you follow these patterns, please take pictures and tag me on social media. I want to hear from you. I want to see what you're making. If you have pattern suggestions, case suggestions, listener tales, comments, criticism, whatever, shoot me an email at murdershecrocheted@gmail.com, and we can go from there. I have some good stuff planned for you guys that I'm excited about. So until I see you next time, stay crafty and stay creepy.